we typically get a couple questions on materials. Let me just make a mention of that now. Um, we will have we're recording this, and we will post the recording together with a PDF of the PowerPoint within a few days. Typically, it's within 3 or 4 days of the event. That'll be on our online video library, and I'd be glad to post the link to where you'll find that. So that should be available in a few days. And in the meantime, before you leave today's webinar, we have in a file share pod at the very end of the webinar a handout that you can take with you, so to speak, that you can download. And that has the core content, really, the most important part, the employability skills in it. So that's a little bit about how you can look at this webinar again or share the information with others who weren't able to join today. Again, I'd like to very much welcome all of you to this event. My name is Catherine Green, Director of CalPro, and I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Jamar Naloms is a Senior Technical Assistance Consultant with the American Institutes for Research, or AIR. AIR is the parent company of CalPro. Jamar's portfolio of work involves education, disability research and services, youth development, workforce development, and health disparities. And her work has included strategic guidance and technical assistance to the Washington State Board of Community and Technical Colleges in the integration and replication of employability skills for faculty, and as a subject matter expert and workshop facilitator for AIR's National Reporting System, or NRS, of the Adult Ed Accountability System. In addition, Jamar's led the development of resources to build state and district capacity to support post-secondary success, including the online CCRS Organizer Scorecard tool and the work-based learning definitions, themes from states and national organizations resource. Before joining AIR, Jamar consulted to and worked for national and local organizations to support their capacity building efforts, including strategic planning, professional development, strategic and collaborative partnerships, and resource board and program development. So as you can see, Jamar is eminently qualified to lead us in an exploration of this subject. We're very pleased to welcome our colleague in, and I will now turn the mic over to Jamar, and I'll stay watching the chat pod, and as will Blair Roy, so if you have any tech questions, let us know. And again, we'll have a recording of this available where you'll be able to access the presentation. All right, thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Catherine, for that introduction. And all those things that you've all heard that I do and have done, I learned how to do them in my first job, one of my first jobs working at Dunkin' Donuts. And that's only half a joke. Some of that is very real. But I'm really glad to be here today with you all and to share this information. And I do hope that some of the strategies and resources that we provide will assist you in the work that you do to support the career readiness of the adult learners that you work with. So I'm going to start off by reviewing our agenda. We'll spend a short amount of time doing an overview of what middle skill jobs are, why they're important, and what they look like in the California landscape. And that's primarily to make sure that we all know what we're talking about and we're referencing it with the same lens. And then I'll do a brief overview of employability skills, defining them and looking at that middle skill and employability skills connection, and then walking you through the employability skills framework using some references to business and industry as well as to the adult learner space in which we all operate in. And then finally, what we'll spend the remainder of our time on is focusing on how you can integrate employability skills in your own space, into that adult education learning space. And then I'll close out with just a couple of slides that provide some links to tools and resources to help you do that. I'm going to talk for a while, but then we will pause for some questions. So I just wanted to give you that heads up on the very front end. So what are middle skill jobs? Well, middle skill jobs are those positions that require some level of post-secondary education, but less than a four-year college degree. And I noticed that some of you who logged in will be familiar with what we mean, or some variations of this. So a good example is occupational or industry-based certifications, programs that provide for certification, for example, in information technology or food science, or as a pharmacy technician. Another example of post-secondary education, but that's less than a four-year college degree, would be an associate's degree. Or it could also be a combination of on-the-job training and then a licensure. So I noticed it looked like there were a couple of folks from apprenticeship-focused programs and organizations, and that's a good example. So it might be a license you earn as an electrician, as a plumber, as an embalmer, or a license you might earn as a licensed practicing nurse or a vocational nurse. One of the things that I do want to point out is that the term middle skill shouldn't be confused with the ease of a job. Middle skill jobs can be complex, and they can be technical, and they require the use of multiple competencies across the individual that's in that position. And so what types of industries do we find middle skill jobs in? They include healthcare and manufacturing and information technology, construction, including green and environmental related construction, like renewable energy and wind and solar power. Biotechnology is an industry, business, finance as an industry, leisure as an industry. And as you can see on this slide, there are a number of different positions that are across the industries you just heard me mention. And this is by no means an all-inclusive list. So in the healthcare field, you might have radiation therapists or emergency medical technicians. Law enforcement, you might have sheriffs or police officers. IT, web designers, computer network specialists, also construction, and also cargo and freight agents, and it goes on and on. So there really are a variety of different positions across a variety of different industries where we find middle skilled job positions. But why are they important? So part of the importance is because we do know that it's estimated by 2020 we're going to have all of the jobs requiring some type of training beyond high school and a post-secondary education. And even more explicit in that is that 30% of the job openings in that same time period will require some college or an associate's degree. Some of the statistics that you don't necessarily see up here, the 36% of the job openings are estimated will not require education beyond high school, and then 35% of job openings would require at least a bachelor's degree. And so when we take a look at what that means, particularly in the California landscape, you've got a number of middle skilled jobs, but not necessarily the adequate amount of workers to fill those positions, or workers with the skills that employers are looking for. So to highlight that, I pulled some information from the National Skills Coalition, and if you look at this pie chart, you can see that in 2015. 50% of all jobs in California were middle skilled jobs. And then that 17% mark, when you look at the green piece of the pie chart, those represent low skilled jobs. And low skilled jobs are the jobs that don't require any education beyond a high school diploma. And then that darker blue, that 33%, are what are deemed high-skilled jobs. So 33% in 2015 of high-skilled jobs required a bachelor's degree or a greater or more in terms of education. But in 2015, only 39% of workers were actually trained to the middle skill level. And it is estimated that between 2014 and 2024, 43% of all the job openings will be for middle skill jobs. So there is a strong demand for middle skill jobs in California. And I wanted to show you some information related to the top 3 industries in jobs in the state that don't require a bachelor's degree but pay at least $35,000. And this represents the time frame between 2013 and 2015. And you can see it's in the manufacturing sector, health services, and then combining information, finance, and real estate. When you talk about that gap, one of the things to note is why that gap exists. Some of the reasons include retirement, the departure of older workers from the workforce who have a set of expertise, and that expertise is leaving with them. Another reason is that technology is going at a pace, it's changing at a pace that's greater than it's changed in any generation before us. And there's a need for workers who have this knowledge and who have the ability to stay up to date with changes that happen as a result of the pace at which technology itself has changed. But the other reason why I think it's important to highlight middle skill jobs and their importance is because of the success factor. So there's this human success factor. One of the things that emerging research is showing us is middle skill jobs provide the opportunity for gainful employment, but also for sustainable wages over a lifetime. So that's important for the adult learners that we work with who are unemployed or underemployed, who may have been in the workforce and are looking to return to the workforce, or may be in reentry programs looking to be connected with jobs that allow them the opportunity for promotion and gainful employment. The other factor of importance is the economic success in terms of what it means for us, whether we're talking about California as a state or as a region, within a region, or globally. Employers want employees and human resources that fill their needs, that allow them to get the work done that helps their bottom line, whatever that bottom line may be for their company or for their industries. And so when we are able to provide workers that have the skills that they're looking for, we help increase the chances that they'll stay. We also are providing an opportunity to be attractive to employers who may be based somewhere else but want to come into our region. And then globally, we want to support the economic success of our country when we're talking about an international perspective, and they need the talent to help them be successful and be competitive. So those are some of the reasons why middle skill jobs are important, looking at a few different aspects and some data that's indicated their importance. And so I want to stop here for a moment and ask a poll question. And that question, should show up in a second. And even if it doesn't, just think about the question. But did you see or hear an industry or career pathway that your organization focuses on? So in what you just heard in that brief and very fast overview of middle skill jobs, did you hear or see of a position, of an industry, of a related career pathway that you currently work with your adult learners on? It would be great if you could type your answers into the poll box. See, we've got folks heard healthcare, technology, plumbing, construction. Great. Any others? Vocational nursing, excellent. IT, information technology. Construction, great. Excellent. Certified nursing assistants, that's in the healthcare field. Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, a lot in healthcare, which is not surprising. Early childcare, excellent. Education, in the education space, early childcare is one of the areas where middle skill jobs are available. Wonderful. Nursing senior care, excellent. Construction and solar, excellent. Great. So I'm glad to see that this sounds familiar. Hopefully it's hopeful to know that a lot of the work that you're doing is right in line with clearly what is a need in the state. And so I'm going to move forward to doing a brief overview of employability skills, highlighting what that connection is with middle skill jobs, and then walking through a framework. And then we'll pause for some questions. But when we first talk about a basic definition of employability skills, what we're referring to are the skills that they're general skills and they're the knowledge base that's necessary for success in the labor market at all employment levels and in all sectors. We refer to employability skills by a number of different terms: 21st century learning skills, essential skills, non-cognitive skills, transferable skills, workplace skills. I'm sure I've left out soft skills. That's the biggest one, soft skills, which I always think is interesting because I don't think the skills are soft. Sometimes I think employability skills are quite challenging for us to develop, whether we're developing them as an adult or whether we're developing as a young adult or a young person. But what I think is most important to note, despite what we call them, they usually refer to the same sets of skills, knowledge, and competencies. The important piece here is it does not matter what industry you're in. You could be in agriculture, you can be in information technology, you can be in construction, you could be a hospital administrator, a lab technician, or a Maryland staff person in that same hospital. Regardless of the position that you're in, regardless of the industry that you're in, these are the skills and competencies that employers are looking for to help them move their business forward. And so when you think about the middle skill jobs that you heard and then the employability skills connection, part of that connection is because these are the skills, and we'll back into what they are specifically, but they're the skills that are most cited among employers as needed. And we also know from research that the demonstration of employability skills is correlated with better hiring rates, success on the job, and earnings. When we look from a large span of time, going back to 1980s to the current time, we also find that the jobs that require a focus or a strong base of skills that fall into the employability skills framework, that's increased by 83%. And you can even see from the other two bullet points, those are some of the types of skills that you're about to see reflected in the framework. But what I love about this is that also when employees were asked about the types of skills that they rely on, they also mentioned skills that very cleanly will fall into the framework that we're about to review. Another recent survey that was done showed that it was a survey of almost 3,000 human resource professionals, and they listed as their top 3 skills as hiring managers as a positive attitude, communication skills, and teamwork. That's what they were looking for. And so some of you may have heard from employers, hey, we can teach enhance the content knowledge that they're coming with or help develop the technical piece, but we need them to have the employability skills or the 21st century learning skills or the soft skills when they walk in the door. So I'm going to walk us through the framework, and then we'll pause for questions. But one of the things that I'm going to ask, if you'll do, is as I go through this framework, I want you to think back to the responses you had in the original poll about your first job and the skills that you developed in that first job to see if they're reflected in this framework. And from your responses, I'm pretty sure the answer will be yes. But I always think it's great to reflect back on our own experiences to help inform how we work with our adult learner population. The other thing I would ask you to do is to put a lens on where you're asking yourself, do we do any programming, or does our curriculum reflect any of these skills that I'm hearing are part of this framework? And so the employability skills framework that I'm going to review today was developed by the Office of Adult and Technical Education, and it reflects a variety of frameworks that captured existing employability skills standards and assessments, and then it was vetted and reviewed by business and industry, educators, and other nonprofits, including workforce development representatives. The framework itself is divided into 3 categories and then 9 skills, and then you'll see that there are skill components within each category. The first category are effective relationships, and this is what's going to feel very familiar to us when we talk about employability skills or hear the term soft skills. These are the skills that enable individuals to interact effectively with clients, coworkers, and supervisors. So for example, that's customer service, or how well do you work with members in a team environment or a collaborative environment. The next category are workplace skills, and these are the skills that employees need to successfully perform their work task. So for example, if you have to use a machine or technology, do you actually know how to use that and put it into place? Do you know how to communicate in a way that whoever your audience is, whether it's your supervisor or a customer, is able to understand what it is that you are communicating to them? Another example is, the third category is applied knowledge. And that's the thoughtful integration of academic knowledge and technical skills put to practical use in the workplace. And so a lot of us, whether we are talking about basic literacy skills, basic mathematical skills, to more complex skills, scientific principles, etc., you'll see that that's what falls into this category, as does critical thinking, which is usually the #1 thing cited by employers across industries that they want employees to have. So we're going to look at each one of these sections. And again, I would remind you, think about that lens of your first job, as well as the work that you're currently doing, and if you see any alignment. So interpersonal skills refers to the teamwork piece and the customer and service needs, resolving conflict. And I'm not going to read everything on the screen, but I want you to see these first, because I do want to give you some examples so that what may seem obvious is not always going to be as obvious as it sounds when we read the description. And so demonstrates integrity, demonstrates professionalism, and takes initiative. I'm going to give you some examples that highlight those. One of the things that I know adult basic education is consistently hearing from employers are, well, can you give us an employee who could pass a drug test, right? Well, that's the integrity piece. If we talk about professionalism, and you think back 10 or 15 years ago, if you were running a program or delivering instruction and someone pulled out their phone or their computer, the likelihood is they would have been checking their email or making a phone call. But now the likelihood is they might actually be doing research because the internet is at a very different level than what it was even 10 years ago, frankly, but 10 or 15 years ago. And so it's your setting has a lot to do with what's an appropriate behavior and what's not an appropriate behavior. And those are the types of things that we want to help adult learners be sure that they understand what that looks like in the workplace. And part of doing that is making sure they understand what that looks like even within our own space of instruction or program or apprenticeship. Another example, actually this comes from one of your colleagues, the way that I love how she described this. So she runs a computer center, and she was getting so frustrated that the students would come in and say, hey, I need to use the computer to do my resume. And she said, I understand now what you mean about calling it out, because I got so frustrated one day, I finally said, you know, it's professional for you to say, hi, how are you? To exchange courtesies. That's what you should do in the workplace, so you should practice it here. And and she said after she started doing that, it became, people recognized, oh, okay, we know if we don't do it, she's going to call us out before she even allows us into the room to actually use the computers. So those are really light examples, but I think that's part of recognizing on the surface these sound like common sense and things that folks should know, but it's not always easy, and it's part of our strategy is to be able to call that out in the environments that we're in with our adult learners. The next section has 5 skill sets, and this is the workplace skills category. And this is where we have resource management, information use, communication skills, systems thinking, and technology use. So resource management, a good example of that is for those of you that are doing healthcare, apprenticeship, or construction-oriented programming. When there's a project that your students have to work on, depending on what their role is, they have to know how to manage, everyone has to know how to manage their time, but their resources that they're provided to get the project done. And if they're supervising their other team members, you know, what does that look like? So that's an example of where in our space we might use resource management. We find that resource management and systems thinking are 2 areas that are usually the least reflected in curriculum and or in guiding standards. So that's just something to note. But another category is information use, and that's about locating information and analyzing it, right? Organizing it and analyzing it. And then we have communication skills. And that's the being able to verbally communicate, listen actively, communicate through other mediums. And so we have here written materials, but we've really expanded. So it might be also the ability to communicate virtually, the ability to communicate written would be in a blog form. So what that looks like may be very different depending on what the field of interest is or what you're doing in your program. A lot of times people think that communication skills really should have been in the effective relationships category, but I'll talk, when I'm done highlighting each of the categories, I'll give you some examples of how they overlap and how we look at why we put them where they're placed, the categories that they're placed in. And then systems thinking, this is one that is really important for employers. For employers, they want someone to know, no matter what, whether you're the mechanic in my airline or you're the pilot in my airline or the flight attendant, I want you to understand our overall business and the role that you play in it and how integral your role is to the work being successful. And so that's part of the systems thinking piece. Where do you fit in? And then within that, how do you monitor yourself? How do you monitor the work that you do and connect it to other work? And what ideas might you have for improving that system, or how do you contribute to improving this system? And then there's technology use, which is very straightforward. It's the understanding and the use of technology, but that shouldn't be confused with just how to use a computer or how to use software on a computer. Manufacturing itself has gotten sometimes more complex on one hand, but more efficient, for example, through adapting different types of technology to help get the work done. And so that would be an example as well that falls into this category. And then the final category are in the applied knowledge area. And this relates to applied academic skills and then critical thinking skills. And again, on the surface, this may seem straightforward. Let me show you what critical thinking skills are in a moment. This may seem straightforward. You're talking about using mathematical strategies and procedures, scientific principles, reading and writing skills, and then critical thinking, the ability to think critically, creatively, make sound decisions, and solve problems. But I think about California. California is really big on meeting and conference and event planning. I mean, people go to California all the time for those purposes and for vacation. Well, whether you're talking about event planning, culinary arts, or construction, all of these use calculation of cost in one way, shape, or another. And so, you know, how do I calculate what I would need if X number of people are coming to this conference, or, you know, what the charge is going to be? In construction, we think about mixing building materials so that they meet legal specs, right? That's the use of applied academic skills. You know, do you know what mathematical strategies and procedures that you need? And then one of my favorite examples for West Coast is when you think about the wine industry. So the wine industry, it's you know, we may be the consumers of wine, but a lot actually goes into developing a wine, and part of that are scientific principles and procedures and critical thinking. When you think about, okay, if we use pesticides, what's the effect of this pesticide on the worker, on the consumer? What's the ratio that I need to have so that it does what I need it to do, but is still safe? All of those are examples of applied knowledge and how they can be put to use in industry. And so, as you can see in this framework, it's again the three categories: effective relationships, workplace skills, applied knowledge, and then the skills that go along with those categories. And one of the things I do want to point out, as I mentioned earlier, a number of these sections do overlap. So communication, yes, we have communication when we're talking about effective relationships. How do I work well with others? How do I respond to customers? How do I act in a case where a conflict resolution may be needed? That's a little different than the communication skills referenced in the workplace category. The communication skills in that category are about what are my communication skills that are necessary in order for me to get the job done, the actual task or activity on hand done. And the reality is both of them are integral and needed for success as an individual employee and also as part of a business. And so we do know that these skills can be taught. There sometimes are schools of thought that say they can't be taught. You either have these skills or you don't, and that's not true. Again, emerging research has shown us these can be taught. So I'm going to stop there for a moment and see if there are any questions. And not seeing any questions in the chat box, I'm going to move us to the next poll. And so I'm curious, did any of the skills that you heard mentioned fall into any of the categories? So I'm sorry, skills that from your first job, that you mentioned in the first poll fall into any of the categories? And if so, in that first poll box, check all that apply. And I'm sure that some of them did. And then in that second box, we're asking you, what type of program or activity have you done in your setting that might emphasize one of these skills? And I know early on, as you guys are filling out the poll, that people mentioned they had waited tables, they were a babysitter in home daycare, which I think is a great example. That and the lifeguard are great examples of where you had to demonstrate responsibility. And I think sometimes people forget babysitting, you actually have to respond to the needs of the little ones that you're babysitting. Waiting tables, oh my goodness, the customer service piece that goes along with that. And being able to work with animals and the responsibilities and the need for organization that goes with that. And then one I love seeing was the shoe shine person and what that means and what you need to have as a skill set, particularly for being able to listen to folks in that process. So this is great. In that first poll, it looks like definitely a majority of folks saw skills. Everyone saw at least one of the skills represented from their first job. That's wonderful. And then in terms of skills that you are reflecting in your current work with adult learners, I see there's problem solving, new world of work, workplace skills in place, civics, excellent. This is great. This is great. And soft skills integration through new world of work. Wonderful, wonderful. Interpersonal skills and communication skills. I love that. And having your students pre-literacy, having them call you when they're not going to attend. And that's something that you'll see is going to come up as one of the strategies. So I'm going to spend the rest of the time, and we will have time for additional questions, but I'm going to spend the rest of the time now actually providing you with some strategies that we know have worked to integrate these employability skills in the adult education space. From a very broad level, you can use employability skills to give you some common language, both with your adult learners and with employers. And that very first one, that's what I'll talk about the most in a minute, and that's identifying the employability skills so that you can apply and integrate them into your own instruction and monitor to the extent that you do or don't have some of these skills reflected. Another thing is calling attention, and I gave you an example of that. A lot of times, and even with what I just saw in that poll, you are emphasizing employability skills, and sometimes we don't even know it, and because we don't realize, hey, wait a minute, this is actually critical thinking that they're working on, or this is a great example of systems thinking at play, we don't know to call that out to the very folks that we're helping learn that. And when we do call that out, we're helping them have an aha moment and giving them a way to articulate when they go before an employer in an interview, here is how I've demonstrated systems thinking. Or instead of just saying, yes, I know how to think critically, they are able to give an example. But part of that is that we as instructors or as counselors have to help call that out for them. And that's also part of helping them communicate their employability skills to employers. And then because most of you also either work with or strive to engage employers in the work that you do to support your learners, these three things are related to that. And so when you can use employability skills as common language, you're able to say, hey, if you're in the pathway of engineering, and what are the key skills that you want for your company or for your industry, you can have them help inform your curriculum or your program to be sure that those skills are reflected. And the same thing in training programs, and if and when you are able to collaborate for work-based learning opportunities for your adult learners. And so here is one tool to help guide the integration of employability skills into your program. You can use this tool with lesson plans, with program plans, with curriculum. And I'll show you how you can take a set of lesson plans and look across the lesson plans. But first, we start with this tool, which is our formative lesson planning tool. If you take a look at that very first category, that's where you're going to highlight what your objectives are or the desired outcomes are, or if you're working with standards. If you're an administrator and you're working with standards, you can also use this for standards. But those belong in the first column. As a result of doing this lesson today or running my program over the next 13 weeks, what are some of the objectives and outcomes I want my students to achieve? And then I want you to go to this third column, which says student-led elements. That column is highlighting what it is that students are actually supposed to be doing as a result of this lesson plan. And I'll show you an example of that in a moment on the next slide. But it's that middle column that helps you as an instructor or as a leader or an administrator know what are the elements and the activities that I'm doing to make sure my student is actually doing the pieces that I'm hoping that they do. And it'll make a lot more sense in a second when I show you the example. But then when you go to the very bottom of this form, you see the employability skills categories listed there. And what you want to do is determine, are my objectives, are the instructions and how I'm providing and guiding these activities for my students and the activities themselves that I'm expecting my adult learners to be doing as a result of this lesson, what employability skills, if any, are they reflecting? And you can start with the broad category, and then using that framework, you can break out into more specifics using those skill components. You know, this is what within communication skills is being highlighted in this lesson plan. And so here is an example of this. And this is a very broad level example, but I still think it's a good one. So if you look in the outcome and standards box, you see the general objective is that students will understand how to evaluate and complete a job application. This is filled out, this formative lesson planning tool is filled out based on a level 4 English as a second language lesson plan. So the adult learners went through the completion of a job application process, including face-to-face questioning and answering, verbal interaction, and critical review of their peer work. That was some of the activities that happened. And so you can see in that second column, what are some of my roles as an instructor. I need to observe students working and listening with each other and their ability to assess for understanding. I provide clarification of information on directions if they needed, and I provide materials to the students. But what is it that I'm expecting the students to do as they go through this lesson plan? I want them to work together as a team. I want them to express and share thoughts with their classmates, provide feedback, work independently. And then I'm able to say, I know what that should look like, right? I know what these things should look like if they're doing them. Which employability skills do they actually align themselves with? And so this is an example of how this has been used for a lesson planning tool. To give you another example of a much more detailed outcome or standard, it might be of the same lesson plan. Students will prepare for and participate effectively in a range of conversations with diverse partners and build on each other's ideas and clearly express their own ideas. So you might even want to be much more detailed about what your outcome or standards are. And so this tool provides you the opportunity to do that and to start connecting alignment between your objectives what you're actually expecting your students to do and the employability skills that it relates to. And then this tool, which I'm not going to review, but it is in the materials that you'll be provided the link for, is a summative lesson planning tool. And so what I like about this tool is you can use it across lesson plans, count out how many times did we actually hit critical thinking, or did we hit systems thinking or resource management, and you can use it in team discussions, or if you do cross-departmental work or work in partnerships with an employer to say, we know for sure that in this work-based learning opportunity, our learners are getting X, Y, and Z skill, and we know for sure in the classroom portion of the activity or our programmatic portion, they're getting A, B, and C skills. So, are there gaps, or have we hit all of the employability skills framework? So that's one way to take that formative tool and look at it across all of the employability skills. And then this is just also another really quick note. It's a very similar tool, but this is in the materials that you'll have the link to, and it's very specific to if you're engaging in workplace opportunities for your adult learners. And so on the right-hand side of your screen, those are some guiding questions that you can ask internally as a team, that you can ask in working with the employer that you're engaging, and frankly, with adult learners, that you can also ask sometimes with adult learners to say, hey, what is it that you're expecting from an employability skills perspective that you should either be demonstrating, or that you should walk away with this opportunity, that you should walk away with as a result of this work-based learning experience and opportunity. So it can be used across those different populations. And then this is frankly one of my favorite tools, and it's a crosswalk and planning tool. The reason why I like it is because sometimes we know that we're teaching a skill, or that a skill is being reflected in our program, but we don't stop to ask, how explicitly is it being reflected, right? So explicit in this case meaning, is it very clearly demonstrated that we are highlighting collaboration and a demonstration of integrity in this lesson plan? Does it not require any explanation because it's so obvious, not only in the lesson plan or in the program design, but in the actions that our adult learners are taking, right? Or is it more implicit, that maybe it requires some explanation if I'm trying to describe to an employer or a sponsor that, yep, this is what they're learning, but we get at it in an indirect way. It's not as, it requires some level of rationale to describe the connection between the outcomes we're trying to achieve and the employability skill component. And so this allows you, if you notice in that very first column, and this is from the critical thinking skills section, it really breaks out indicators, right, that critical thinking is actually in play. And then it allows you to check off whether or not it's explicitly or implicitly being highlighted. And then you can see this scale, great, minimal, or not at all, and you get to decide what that means for you in your environment. So maybe minimal means, it shows up in one instance of our program, right, versus, you know what, every single week in our program, whatever lesson we're doing or experience we're providing, we are constantly hitting effective relationships and constantly hitting information use. Then that might be great. That may be how you determine that it's great. So this helps you to determine what the depth is of a particular employability skill, and based on what we know it looks like, so in this case, again, critical thinking skills, and what does it look like. And I think one important thing to note is that for any of these tools, remember that you may not hit all of the employability skills framework, and that's okay. That's the beauty of the tools, especially if you use it in terms of planning before your program starts each cycle. You can determine what's there and what's not there. And then do we have partners or folks that we collaborate with? Because it's not expected that any one provider will have all of the skills and expertise to to provide or help enhance these skills with your program participants, with your adult learners. And so this allows for you to determine not only where there might be some gaps, but frankly where you may have a strength in developing or enhancing a given employability skill based on what your program does and how it's set up. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions. And I know there are folks typing in the box. So as you type in the box, we'll wait for those questions to come up. I'll just highlight, yes, and so one of the questions is, can we download this? So I'll highlight where you can find some of this information. And then, is this the new world of work that was mentioned? From MDRC, so yes, I'm assuming that that's the same new world of work that people referred to earlier. And so here is where you can find, I'm actually going to just jump ahead. There is a website, it's the CCRS Center, which stands for College and Career Readiness. Do not be dissuaded that it focuses on supporting state education agencies and also local education agencies. This work can be used, and it has been used in the adult education space. As a matter of fact, one example from your peers, I'll highlight in 1 second, but I want to show you where these materials are. So there's actually a whole, the forms I talked about are going to be both in the handouts and in the workbook. So there's an entire workbook that's available for you to download for free. None of this is not at cost. And there's also a facilitator's guide if you decided you wanted to highlight the employability skills framework with your team. You could actually do that. You could, this would guide you in doing that, and you could tailor it for your particular work environment. One of the things that I wanted to mention, by the way, really very quickly, is in this tool, this tool, one of your, a group of your colleagues in the same space but in a different state, and I work with a few states in the adult learning space. What they actually did was they used this tool they used this tool and the other tool by developing scenarios that they use with their adult learners. And the scenarios were based on real life situations that their adult learners had come to them with, saying, well, I have this problem at work, or that some of their business and industry partners had come to them and said, here's, some of the challenges that we've had with some of the workers that that we've partnered with you to be in this work-based learning opportunity or space. And so they actually developed their own very short scenarios, and then they first as a team said, all right, what would be the employability skills that we would need the person in the scenario to learn? And then they also did it as part of their program with their adult learners. So you can adapt these tools in any way that you feel is most suited for you and your environment in supporting adult learners.
We have just a couple minutes till we wrap up, so I would like to on behalf of CalPro and those participating today, I'd like to thank Jamar for a tremendous webinar, very understandable and clear, and yet dealing with a lot of complex tools and topics. So thank you so much, Jamar, for a great, clear, helpful webinar. We're looking forward to doing more with this topic in a future self-directed online course CalPro will offer. And we would very much value your feedback. There is an evaluation for this event. If you click on the evaluation link pod that's just underneath the big AIR logo on the PowerPoint, you'll be able to access that. And we also are happy to provide a certificate of attendance if required or if desired. Please send it to your request to calpro@air.org. And if you'd be kind enough to include your full name and also put research webinar and the date in the subject line, that would be really helpful. We'll be able to get those out to you in the next week. And so again, thank you very much, everyone, for joining and for please look forward to the recording of this event on our online video library on our website. That should be available in the next few days together with the PDF of the PowerPoint. Very good. We'll keep this open for another minute or two. If there's any last comments or questions you want to make in the chat pod, please do so. And Blair notes that the evaluation was sent, and so if you're still in the webinar room, you might notice that there'll be a new browser tab that popped up or is blinking for you, and that's where you'll find the evaluation for the event today. And yes, the Maria asks the evaluation where to send the request for certificate of attendance. It's calpro@air.org, and please include your name and the research webinar and date in the subject line or body of the message. And there is a handout, actually not the PowerPoint, but a handout that should be available in the file share pod that includes the employability skills. The PowerPoint we actually updated, and we're going to be including that in our online video library. And to access that, you would hover over the name of the file in the Files pod over on the lower left corner and click on that and then follow the prompts to download it. Any final questions? Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jamar and CalPro team, for putting this together. We're so glad so many of you could join. Please share this information with your agencies and other teachers and benefit your learners. Very good. Thank you so much. We'll be closing up the room now. And if you have any further questions, just email calpro@air.org. We'll follow up with you.
Thank